Mid-morning thunder rolled across the sky as Adisa Kamba stepped into the towering sanctuary of Glory River Church. Her shawl, worn but clean, hung loosely over her shoulders, and her shoes were tired from too many miles of walking. She moved quietly, hoping to slip into the last row without drawing a single glance. But the whispers rose the moment she crossed the aisle. Some members looked away in discomfort. Others smirked. Pastor Lemuel Tand, standing tall behind the golden pulpit, paused his sermon the instant he noticed her. The hall fell unnaturally still. His voice, usually soft and warm, sharpened like a blade. "Ushers," he said, pointing directly at her, "escort this woman out. She refuses to respect the dignity of God's house." Gasps rippled across the congregation. Adisa froze, her eyes widening in disbelief as two ushers walked toward her. She clutched her small handbag, the only gift her late husband Cato had left behind, before they could reach her. An elderly deacon rose from the front row holding a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed with age. His voice trembled as he lifted it high. "This letter arrived at the church this morning. It is from Cato Kamba." Every heartbeat in the sanctuary stopped. Long before the Glory River Church became a grand building filled with marble floors, polished pews, and chandeliers that sparkled like frozen rain, it was nothing more than a humble wooden shelter standing on a patch of dusty ground outside the quiet settlement of Karima Hills. In those early days, the congregation was small, barely 20 people, and they relied on shared strength more than anything else. Adisa Kamba remembered those beginnings vividly. She and her husband, Cato Kamba, had been among the first to arrive when the church was just an idea whispered between neighbors. The couple carried planks on their shoulders, swept the rough ground, and prayed beneath the open sky. Each sunrise brought a new task, and each sunset left them exhausted yet fulfilled, convinced that they were building something sacred. Their home was modest, tucked near a field of cassava, but it was always warm with laughter. Cato, a man known for his calm presence and steady kindness, would return from long days of carpentry work with stories that made Adisa smile until her face glowed. They had little, but they shared everything: meals, dreams, burdens, and a faith that guided every choice they made. The church became the heart of their marriage, a place where they dedicated their time, their scarce money, and their hope. When Pastor Lemuel joined as a young preacher seeking to revive his calling, Cato welcomed him with open arms, offering him tools, guidance, and the assurance that the community would support him. As the months passed, the church grew. Families from nearby villages began attending because they heard the hymns echoing across the hills. Children ran barefoot through the courtyard while elders discussed scripture beneath the mango trees. It was a place that felt safe, a sanctuary without judgment. Adisa rose early each Sunday to sweep the floor, arrange fresh leaves at the altar, and prepare small pots of tea for anyone who arrived tired or hungry. She never complained. Serving felt like breathing. Cato often teased her that the church wouldn't stand without her hands, or she would laugh softly and say, "It is God's house. We only carry the stones." Everything changed slowly in ways she did not notice at first. Pastor Lemuel became more polished, more distant, more focused on the growing attendance. He preached with confidence that impressed newcomers, and gifts began flowing in from wealthier families. The wooden benches were replaced with cushioned seats. A tiled floor arrived next. Then came the tall metal gate, the security guards, the sound system so powerful it could be heard from the next village. Members whispered that the church was becoming modern and successful, and many celebrated the transformation. Yet Adisa felt a quiet shift. People like her and Cato, who had helped build the foundation, were now treated as ordinary attendees rather than pillars. Still, she never allowed disappointment to settle. Cato reminded her that the church belonged to everyone, not just those with deep pockets. He continued volunteering, repairing broken steps, reinforcing the roof during storm season, and helping guide the youth group. But as the church expanded, Lemuel's priorities shifted even more. He began hosting private dinners for businessmen and wealthy families. He encouraged special offerings that only certain members could afford. He preached about blessings tied to giving, not compassion. Some congregants whispered concerns, but their voices were small compared to the influence Lemuel had gained. Then came the sickness. Cato's health faltered slowly, at first a persistent cough, weakness, nights where he could barely stand without holding onto a wall. Adisa begged him to rest, but he refused to sit still. "When God calls me," he told her, "I want to be found serving." As months passed, the illness tightened its grip, and the man who once lifted beams with ease now struggled to rise from his mat. During this time, Adisa spoke with the pastor's wife, hoping the church would help with medical costs. Instead of comfort, she received cold politeness and promises that led nowhere. The congregation prayed for Cato, but Pastor Lemuel rarely visited. His attention was fixed on new projects, new donors, and expanding his influence beyond Karima Hills. When Cato finally took his last breath, the world around Adisa seemed to fall silent. Neighbors helped her bury him under a tall acacia tree beside their home. The funeral service was simple, attended mostly by villagers who loved him. The pastor arrived late, offered a brief prayer, and left quickly for another meeting. Adisa felt the absence sharply, but there was something deeper that troubled her. Before he passed, Cato had whispered something unusual. He held her hand, squeezed it with fading strength, and said, "Promise me. You will continue attending the church. And if a time comes when my words are needed, they will be found." At the time, she did not understand. Grief clouded everything. The months that followed were heavy. Without Cato's income, Adisa struggled to find work. She cleaned homes, washed clothes, and sold vegetables in the market whenever she could. Some days she earned nothing. Other days she earned barely enough to buy food. But she never stopped going to church, even when her clothes grew old and her shoes began to tear. The sanctuary was the last place where she felt close to Cato whenever she sat in the back row. She imagined him smiling at her the way he used to during Sunday worship. But the church she loved was no longer the same. Pastor Lemuel now ran it with an iron hand wrapped in the smooth voice. He emphasized image, appearance, and status. Members who dressed well were welcomed warmly. Those who struggled financially were often ignored or quietly discouraged from participating. Adisa heard that the pastor had started meeting with investors, interested in turning the church land into a profitable conference center. Rumors of mismanaged funds swirled through the congregation, though none dared confront him openly. Despite everything, Adisa maintained her gentle presence. She arrived early to pray, stayed late to wipe down benches when no one was watching, and always carried a small notebook where she wrote verses that reminded her of Cato. Each page held a line he once read to her, a promise he made or a thought she wanted to remember. That was when the envelope appeared quietly, mysteriously, and without explanation. It arrived in the church office one quiet morning, addressed simply, "To Glory River Church, a message for the appointed time." The handwriting was unmistakably Cato's. No one knew who dropped it off. No one knew why it had been hidden until now. And no one, not even Adisa, knew that inside lay the truth that would shake every brick of the sanctuary she had once helped build. The first Sunday after the mysterious envelope appeared, the atmosphere inside Glory River Church felt different. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, as if everyone sensed that something hidden was about to rise to the surface. The ushers moved with unusual stiffness, avoiding each other's eyes. Even the choir, usually vibrant and spirited, sang with a forced calmness that made the harmonies feel hollow. Adisa Kamba, unaware of the envelope's arrival, walked into the sanctuary with her quiet grace. She took her usual seat at the back, her hands folded in her lap, her heart steady. She had grown used to the stares and murmurs surrounding her presence. Yet something in the room felt more intense this time, more watchful, more unsettled. Pastor Lemuel Tan stepped onto the pulpit with his polished stride. His robe, embroidered with gold, swayed around him like a royal garment. He cleared his throat dramatically before speaking, emphasizing every gesture as though cameras were trained on him. He preached about sacrifice, dedication, and the importance of honoring God with visible excellence. His sermon grew sharper as he moved deeper into it, subtly implying that those who brought shame, disorder, or poverty into the sanctuary were dishonoring the Lord himself. His eyes never left Adisa for long. Between sentences he let his gaze flick toward her, planting seeds of judgment throughout the congregation. But while Lemuel spoke, one person's attention drifted repeatedly toward a locked drawer in the church office, the drawer where the envelope lay. Bwana Jafari, the elderly deacon who had found the letter earlier that week, couldn't shake the feeling that the timing was significant. He knew Cato well. He knew the integrity the man carried in his bones. The envelope had been sealed with careful precision, bearing handwriting he would recognize anywhere. Bwana felt an uneasy weight in his chest whenever he thought about it. Why had it remained hidden for so long? And who delivered it now, at this particular moment? Something inside him whispered that whatever was written inside would challenge everything Lemuel had built over the past years outside of Bwana's quiet concern. The church council was wrestling with its own internal storm. Over the past year, whispers of misuse funds had grown louder. A few council members, including Mosi Daramola and Tumel, had begun noticing irregularities in financial reports. Numbers didn't match. Receipts vanished. Projects that gathered donations never seemed to materialize. When they finally gathered the courage to question Lemuel about the discrepancies, he dismissed them with a charismatic smile and a reminder that visionary leadership sometimes requires decisions that followers cannot yet comprehend. His responses were always poetic enough to calm some but evasive enough to frustrate others. As the church grew in size and influence, Lemuel's behavior shifted even more. He surrounded himself with wealthier members, inviting them to private dinners and consultations about future expansions. He started referring to the church as a brand instead of a spiritual home. He commissioned promotional banners, curated social media posts showcasing his sermons, and encouraged congregants to take photos during services. The sanctuary began feeling less like a place of peace and more like a stage where the poor were either invisible or unwelcome. And in that shifting culture, Adisa became an intentional target, an unspoken symbol of everything Lemuel wished to bury under polish and grandeur. One Sunday, a wealthy businesswoman named Nora Whale entered the sanctuary with an expensive handbag and an air of superiority. Lemuel greeted her personally, walked her to the front row, and announced that she had pledged a generous seed toward the church's new conference hall. The congregation applauded loudly, impressed by the display of generosity. Meanwhile, Adisa stood outside the door, waiting for the crowd to settle before entering. She wanted to avoid drawing attention. She held a small offering in her hand, a few coins she had earned washing clothes the previous day. When she tried to place them in the basket, one of the junior ushers hesitated before accepting it. He glanced at her coins, gave a straying smile, and subtly placed them beneath larger envelopes, almost hiding them as though they didn't matter. During the sermon that day, Lemuel indirectly criticized people who come empty-handed but expect blessings. He spoke about spiritual leeches, burdens on the ministry, and those who drain without contributing. Each sentence felt like a blade aimed at Adisa. Some congregants shifted uncomfortably, especially those who remembered the early days when she and Cato had carried wooden planks on their backs to build the church. But many others nodded in agreement, influenced by the pastor's authoritative tone. One afternoon, as Adisa swept the back corridor after service, something she did voluntarily, she overheard a conversation between Lemuel's wife, Humiliated, and two councilwomen. They were speaking in low voices, but their remarks cut sharply. "She sits there looking pitiful," Humila murmured. "She drags down the church's image. Visitors talk about her. It's embarrassing. She should at least dress properly," one woman added. "This is God's house, not a marketplace." "I've told Lemuel," Humila sighed. "It's time we gently direct her elsewhere. There are smaller congregations that cater to her type." Their laughter echoed through the corridor, soft but cruel. Adisa froze behind the wall, each word tightening inside her like a knot. She didn't move until they walked away, leaving behind a faint scent of expensive perfume and a trail of arrogance that burned her eyes. She waited a long time before coming out, Quietly finishing her task with shaking hands, despite such humiliations, she continued attending. She continued praying. She continued believing that somewhere beneath the layers of pride and performance, the church she once knew still existed. She reminded herself that Cato had insisted she remain no matter what. She could not understand why he had made such a prophetic request on his deathbed, but his tone had carried a weight she dared not ignore. Meanwhile, the church's financial tension grew more apparent. A youth member named Mauro Kittinge, who occasionally helped the church accountant, discovered that funds designated for community programs had been diverted. The computer files looked altered. Receipts for construction materials did not match the actual purchases. Mauro reported the anomalies to Bona Jafari, who listened quietly, his brows tightening. The elder reassured the young man that he would investigate, though he knew that confronting Lemuel openly would put him at risk of being dismissed from the council altogether. Still, the questions persisted. Why was Lemuel suddenly living in a new house on the wealthier side of town? How did he afford multiple business-class trips to conferences abroad? Why was he constantly pressuring congregants for larger donations, while offering vague explanations about future plans that never materialized? Even those who admired him began to wonder. The breaking point came when Lemuel announced a Vision 2030 expansion project, which required each family to pledge a significant sum. He framed it as an opportunity to show their faith. Those unable to contribute were told to pray for a miracle. When Adisa approached the pledge table, wanting to add her name even with her tiny contribution, Yamala stopped her with a raised hand. "Not today, Sister Adisa," she said smoothly. "This project requires participants who can truly commit." Adisa lowered her eyes. Her heart felt small, like a crushed leaf beneath a heavy boot. She walked away slowly, clutching her notebook as if it were the only safe place left in the world. But others noticed. Mosi Daramola, one of the quieter council members, approached her outside afterward. He greeted her gently, asked if she was managing all right, and offered to help her home. She declined politely, but his concern stayed with her. Not everyone had forgotten her value. Some still remembered her and Cato's contributions. Some still carried gratitude in their hearts. As the weeks passed, the strange envelope weighed heavily on Bona's mind. He wanted to open it, but something stopped him. He felt it wasn't his place. He believed Cato had left it for a reason, and that reason would reveal itself in time. Then, one late afternoon, something happened that forced his hand. A cleaner entered the church office to scrub the floors and noticed the drawer slightly ajar. The envelope was half visible. She informed Bona immediately, worried someone had tampered with official documents. Bona rushed to the office, locked the drawer properly, and felt a sudden urgency pulse through him. Later that night, after everyone had left, he sat alone in his small home with a lantern burning beside him. He held the envelope in his hands for a long time. The weight of the paper felt heavier than it should. He thought about Cato's character, his steady devotion, his quiet warnings before his death. He thought about the injustices piling up in the church, the arrogance, the shaming, the misuse of funds, the distance between leadership and humility. He knew the congregation deserved the truth, but he also knew the timing had to be right. The next morning, he brought the envelope to the church service, intending to present it during the council meeting. But something unexpected happened. Lemuel saw the envelope in his hand, and for a brief second a flicker of something, fear, annoyance, passed across his face. He quickly masked it with a smile, but Bona had seen enough to know that the pastor recognized the handwriting. That confirmed everything. Lemuel knew Cato's script. Lemuel knew the significance of any letter the man might have left behind. And Lemuel seemed threatened by it. Bona decided then that the envelope would not be opened in private. It would not be hidden away. It would not be twisted or silenced. It would be read in public in front of the entire congregation, where no manipulation could taint the words of a man who had always walked in truth, and that decision marked the beginning of a storm that would shake the foundation of Glory River Church more violently than any wind that had ever swept across Karima Hills. When the following Sunday arrived, The sun rose with an uneasy glow over Karima Hills, staining the horizon a pale orange that looked more like warning than beauty. Villagers walked toward Glory River Church in small groups, murmuring about the strange tension lingering in the community since Bona had been seen holding the old envelope. Word had spread faster than fire on dry grass. Some believed it contained a blessing. Others whispered it carried a prophecy. But the majority sensed something heavier, something that would not simply pass like a fleeting shadow. Inside the sanctuary, Pastor Lemuel Tan paced behind the pulpit before the service began. His polished shoes tapped sharply against the platform, betraying a restlessness he could not hide. He kept glancing toward the entrance, half expecting Bona to appear with the letter in his hand. Yamela stood beside him, arms crossed tightly, her expression tense. She whispered reminders, strategies, and reassurances, urging him to maintain control, to stay composed, to dominate the narrative before it slipped from his grasp. But Lemuel barely heard her. A strange fear gnawed at him, something he had not felt in years, something he thought he had outgrown. When the church began to prosper, the congregation filed in quickly. Most had arrived earlier than usual, hungry for any hint of what was coming. The choir's warm-up felt disjointed, their voices sounding strained. The ushers moved about uncertainly, offering greetings that lacked conviction. In the back row, Adisa Kamba sat quietly, unaware that the envelope had anything to do with her. She pulled her shawl closer, watching the sanctuary fill. She felt a pressure in the air, but she assumed it was simply another day of subtle judgment. She did not know that her late husband's voice, long silent, was about to stir the ground beneath every soul present. As the service began, Lemuel stepped forward with a forced smile. He spoke passionately about commitment, loyalty, and the dangers of internal rebellion. His tone was sharp, his metaphors dramatic, and his words veiled enough to mask his anxiety but pointed enough to unsettle the council. Some congregants exchanged confused glances. Others listened with growing suspicion. It was clear he was preemptively defending himself from something unseen. Halfway through the sermon, the sanctuary door swung open. Bwana entered with a steady stride, clutching the envelope. The room stiffened. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Lemuel faltered mid-sentence. His voice caught, and for a brief second, genuine panic flickered across his face. Yamela rose abruptly from her seat, her eyes narrowing with warning. Bwana walked down the aisle, stopping near the front row. He lifted the envelope high enough for all to see. A ripple of whispers swept through the room. Even those who disliked confrontation felt their pulse quicken at the sight of it. The letter looked fragile, yet it carried an authority that challenged the grandeur of the entire sanctuary. When the murmurs grew too loud to contain, Lemuel forced himself to regain composure. "Elder Jafari," he said with artificial calm, "please join me in my office. Matters like these are better handled." "No," Bwana interrupted, his voice deep and steady. "This letter was addressed to the church, not to a private office. It belongs to the people who built this sanctuary, prayed here, and sacrificed for its foundation. It belongs to the congregation." A wave of gasps filled the air. Such a direct challenge to Lemuel had never occurred in public before. The pastor's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the sides of the pulpit, whitening his knuckles. Before he could respond, Mosi Daramola stood up from the third row. "I agree with Elder Jafari," he said firmly. "If this letter comes from a man who served this church with integrity, then we have a right to hear it." Several heads nodded sharply around him. Even members who normally stayed silent found themselves lifting their hands in support. The room felt like a pot ready to boil over. Lemuel swallowed hard but forced a stiff smile. "Very well," he said slowly, "if the church wishes to hear it. Then let us proceed." He gestured for Bwana to come forward. Though his eyes betrayed a simmering fury, Bwana climbed the steps to the platform with care, each movement deliberate. He placed the envelope on the pulpit, his wrinkled hands trembling only slightly. The congregation leaned in as though pulled by an invisible force. Even children remained silent. Adisa watched from the back, her breath catching as she recognized the handwriting from where she sat. Her heart thudded painfully against her chest. She rose halfway from her seat, pressing a hand over her mouth. Her late husband's script right there on the altar. A wave of emotion washed through her as she steadied herself on the pew when Bonner broke the seal. The crackling sound echoed unnaturally loud. Like thunder rolling across the sanctuary, he unfolded the letter with reverence, then cleared his throat, but before he could read a single word, Lemuel stepped forward quickly. "Allow me, Elder," he said too eagerly. "As pastor, I should be the one to—" "No," Bonner interrupted again, this time with more force. "You will not read the words of a man you ignored in his final days." The room erupted into whispers, rising in waves of shock. Lemuel's face darkened, but he backed away when council members rose to support Bonner's stance. Even Yamila's expression faltered, though she remained seated with the authority of age and truth behind him. Bonner began reading aloud, "My beloved brothers and sisters of Glory River Church." The congregation quieted instantly. Cato's voice seemed to fill the room through Bonner's steady reading, strong and clear despite the years since his passing. His words carried warmth, humility, and a wisdom that struck deep. He spoke of the early days of the church, the laughter, the shared meals, the unity between families. He described the hard labor that built the sanctuary from the ground up, reminding the congregation who had truly carried the weight of that foundation. Then his message shifted. The tone grew heavier. Cato wrote about concerns he had noticed before falling ill. Financial inconsistencies, decisions made without transparency, priorities shifting from community support to self-promotion. He never accused anyone by name, but his descriptions painted a picture so vivid that the congregation began connecting the dots. Without being prompted, he warned that the church would face a season of deception if it strayed from humility. He urged the leaders to remember that God favored the humble, not the proud. And he stressed that those entrusted with spiritual authority must walk with integrity, not manipulation or greed. As Bonner read these words, Lemuel's expression gradually shifted from irritation to outright fear. Yamala stiffened, clutching her handbag tightly. The members surrounding them whispered with growing concern, their eyes darting between the letter and the pastor. Then came the part that shook the sanctuary to its core. Cato wrote, "If the day comes when my wife, Adisa, is treated without dignity by the church she helped build, then know that the leadership has forgotten the God of truth. Remember her loyalty, remember her sacrifice. And if she's ever cast aside, it will not be her whose faith has failed, but the church whose heart has grown cold." The words struck like a bolt of lightning. An audible gasp swept through the room. Every eye turned toward Adisa, who stood frozen in the back, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her entire body trembled as she leaned against the pew for support. Cato had written about her before he died, foreseeing the very pain she now lived through. Bonner paused to steady his voice before continuing. Cato urged the congregation to protect the vulnerable, to challenge corruption, and to remember that leadership was a responsibility, not a crown. His closing words were simple yet powerful. Stand for truth, even when truth shakes the walls of the sanctuary. When Bonner finished, he folded the letter slowly and placed it on the pulpit. The sanctuary fell completely silent. No preacher, no choir, no scripture had ever produced such a stillness. It felt as though time itself had stopped to listen. Lemuel struggled to maintain his composure. He forced a smile that trembled at the edges. "While we appreciate Brother Cato's sentiments," he began carefully, "we must remember that interpretations can be misunderstood. Emotions are high. Letters written in sickness often—" "Enough," Morrow Kitten said loudly from the youth section. Everyone turned. His voice carried a firmness rarely heard in someone his age. "We've seen the financial records. We've seen how offerings disappeared. We've seen how some members are treated like decoration while others are pushed aside. It was the spark the congregation needed." Mosi rose. "Pastor, we have asked you about missing receipts. You avoided every answer." Two males stood next. "The projects we funded were never completed." A mother named Nadia shouted, "My daughter was denied a scholarship we donated to create. You said the money was reallocated." Then another voice. "And another." The complaints poured out, each one a stone added to the growing mountain of accusation. Lemuel lifted his hands, trying to calm the storm, but his voice cracked. "You are listening to gossip," he shouted. "Gossip is poison. This letter is being used to attack the man of God." But no one was buying it anymore. For years he had spoken with the confidence of a man shielded by authority. Today that shield cracked. The congregation no longer saw him as untouchable. They saw him as a countable dot, and at the center of it all stood Adisa, the woman he had publicly humiliated, whose husband's final words now hung over the sanctuary. Like a divine verdict, her presence alone intensified the tension. She did not speak or raise her hand. She simply stood, tears flowing silently, embodying everything the letter had warned about. Finally, Bonner turned toward the congregation. "The council will meet after service," he announced. "We will address these matters thoroughly. Until then, let us pray." But prayer was the last thing on Lemuel's mind. He stepped off the platform abruptly, his robe swaying behind him as he exited through the side door, pushing past anyone in his path. Yamela hurried after him. Their escape told the congregation more truth than any sermon ever had. And with that, the sanctuary erupted into hushed chaos, shaken, awakened, and ready for the reckoning that was about to unfold. The sanctuary vibrated with a restless, uneasy murmur as Elder Before Maseko held the letter between his trembling fingers. The envelope looked too fragile to contain anything powerful. Yet every eye remained fixed on it, as if it carried the weight of heaven and earth. Pastor Lemuel Tan swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure, though a flicker of panic crossed his polished expression. Beside him, the assistant pastor, Morobi Yella, shifted his stance in discomfort, clearly sensing the storm brewing inside the congregation. Adisa stood frozen in the aisle, her heart pounding as flashes of her late husband's smile, voice, and quiet strength washed through her mind like a tide she had tried so hard to dam for years. She wondered what message she could have possibly left behind, especially one addressed to the church that had pushed her into the shadows for so long. Elder Before cleared his throat slowly, deliberately, as if giving the room time to breathe. "Before I read this," he said, his voice steady but heavy, "you must all understand one thing. This letter was not written recently. It was sealed and dated 10 years ago, long before our sister Adisa lost her husband." The congregation stirred. Some leaned forward while others exchanged startled looks. Lemuel's jaw tightened. 10 years, this meant the letter came long before he became head pastor. He had no idea what secrets or promises it held, and that ignorance terrified him. He nodded stiffly, urging Elder Balfour to continue. The elder slowly broke the seal, unfolding the pages with a gentleness reserved for sacred things. A faint scent of old paper drifted into the air, carrying the aura of something preserved with devotion, even urgency. Adisa's breath caught. The elder began to read. "To the leadership of Glory River Church. My name is Cato Kumba, a humble carpenter of Limnabara district. I am writing this letter not because I seek recognition, but because I fear what may happen when the truth is no longer mine to speak. I have seen things, heard things within these walls that trouble my spirit deeply, and I fear they may grow worse with time." The last line stirred the congregation like a sudden wind sweeping through grass. Elder Before paused just long enough for tension to settle thickly across the room before continuing. "Over the past 2 years, I have quietly supported the church with work, labor, and small funds projects that were never recorded, though they were promised to be. I have asked questions only to be told the accounts were not my concern. I have tried to speak with the then founding elder, but I was warned to let matters rest. But I cannot. I believe the church must stand on truth, even when truth shakes stones loose from the foundation." Pastor Lemuel's eyes began darting back and forth, calculating, searching for ways to regain control. He tried to step toward the pulpit, but members near the front rose slightly, blocking his path with unspoken resistance. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. People were no longer intimidated by titles or robes. The authority rested with the letter, and with the man who wrote it from beyond death. Adisa clasped her hands tightly together. She felt a slow burn rising inside her chest, not anger, but an awakening. A realization that her husband had known something that she, in her grief, never pieced together. Cato was always gentle, but he was never blind, Elder Balfour continued, his voice unwavering despite the tension threatening to crack the air. I fear that corruption may someday grow here if not stopped early. If this letter ever reaches your hands, it means the time has arrived for truth to step into the light. My final request is simple: protect my wife, Adisa. She has suffered much in silence. She has carried burdens most people never notice. If this church ever turns its back on her, then understand you have turned your back on me. Gasps exploded across the sanctuary. The weight of the words hung suspended like a hammer mid-fall. Adisa's knees weakened. Her husband had seen everything: her struggles, her humiliations, the quiet injustices she had faced long before the church ever ordered her out. He had known the path she would one day walk alone, but Elder Balfour wasn't done. He took a deep breath and turned to the last page. There is one final matter I must mention. I have deposited a sum, modest but meaningful, in the name of the church building fund. It was intended for repairs, scholarships, and aid for widows and orphans. I entrusted the funds to leadership, believing they would be used honestly. Should this letter be read one day and those funds be unaccounted for, I urge the congregation to investigate. May God give you courage for whatever truth you find. The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Even the children felt it. No one spoke, breathed loudly, or shifted. Pastor Lemuel stepped forward again, his expression desperate yet controlled. This letter must be misunderstood, he muttered. These are old accusations from a different administration. The church records were updated years ago, but he was interrupted by a woman named Taria Sono, known for her sharp memory and sharper integrity. She rose from the middle pew, lifting an old, worn notebook. Pastor, she said, her voice steady, my late husband kept the original financial records before the transition. I have copies here. They show a deposit of 10,000 setis from Cato Comba. Gasps scattered again. Lemuel flinched. Tari, he said, forcing a smile, those records may be incomplete. Her eyes narrowed. Except that the money is not recorded in any of the new files. Not a single line, Pastor. Another elder, Matend Sefu, stood. His usual calm was now replaced by visible fury. Pastor Lemuel, you refused every request to audit the building fund for the past 5 years. You always said it was unnecessary stress for the church. Lemuel's voice trembled. I protected this church from chaos. No, Matenge snapped. You protected yourself. The congregation erupted in murmurs, some angry, others heartbroken. For years they had trusted him, allowed him to guide their prayers, shape their families, influence their decisions. Now they stared at him as though seeing a stranger wearing the mask of someone they once admired. Adisa felt her pulse throbbing in her temples. The walls of the sanctuary blurred. She had never wanted revenge, only respect, only a space where she didn't feel like a burden. But this moment was bigger than her. It was about truth sharpened by time, released like a doused flame meeting air. Pastor Lemuel's mask finally cracked. This is a witch hunt, he shouted. You are turning against your shepherd. But Elder Balfour stepped closer, raising the letter again. A shepherd does not devour his own flock. The congregation erupted into loud, chaotic voices, some calling for an immediate removal from office, others demanding an investigation, others crying from pure betrayal. Lemuel slammed his fist on the pulpit. I built this church, he roared. At that moment, Adisa found her strength. She stepped forward with slow, steady steps, each one guided by a force she could not see yet deeply felt. No, she whispered, yet her voice carried through the room with startling clarity. This church was built by faith, by sacrifice, by people who gave even when they had very little, including my husband. The chaos fell silent again. All eyes fixed on her, not with pity, but with an awakening respect. As though seeing her for the first time, Adisa continued, her hands trembling but her words firm. You asked them to turn me away. You humiliated me. but you did not break me. And you cannot erase the truth Cato left behind." Lemuel took a step back as if struck. For the first time, his authority crumbled visibly. "You don't understand. I understand enough," Edessa said. "You tried to silence the one person who had nothing left but her dignity. You tried to take even that." Tears flowed down the cheeks of several women who had once turned away from Edessa at church gatherings. Men stared at the floor, ashamed of how easily they had followed the pastor's tone instead of their conscience. The walls of the sanctuary felt alive, buzzing with the collective heartbeat of people finally confronting truth. Elder Before addressed the congregation. "We will suspend Pastor Lemuel immediately while a full investigation begins." Lemuel stumbled backward, his confidence evaporating. "You can't do this." I have served faithfully," Tari interrupted, raising the dusty ledger. "If you served faithfully, you have nothing to fear." Two ushers different from the ones who had attempted to escort Edessa earlier stepped forward. They did not touch Lemuel, but their presence alone signaled that his authority had ended. He staggered, looking around for someone to defend him. But the congregation that once rose to its feet when he entered now stared in cold silence. Edessa felt a sudden wave of emotion sweep through her, not triumph, not vengeance, but relief so deep it forced tears into her eyes. Her husband's words, preserved for a decade, had become the shield she needed today. His voice had returned at the exact moment she needed it most. As the ushers escorted the disgraced pastor away, Elder Before turned back to the congregation. "We must finish reading the final note attached to the letter," he said. He flipped to the small postscript written in Cato's uneven handwriting. "If Edessa is ever found standing alone, I ask this church please stand with her. Treat her as you would have treated me." That simple sentence broke every heart in the room. People wept openly, men who rarely cried, women who had judged too quickly, youths who had not known compassion until this moment. For the first time in years, Edessa did not feel invisible. She felt held by her husband's love, by truth, and by a congregation finally waking up, and the investigation was only just beginning. The sanctuary remained heavy with silence long after Pastor Lemuel was escorted from the room. People sat rigidly, gripping their hymn books or staring at the floor as though trying to understand how the walls that once felt sacred now felt foreign. Elder Before Masako lowered the letter to his side, his shoulders trembling under the weight of what had been revealed. The assistant pastor, Morobiela, stood frozen near the pulpit, his face pale and conflicted, as if he had carried unspoken burdens for far too long. Edessa remained in the center aisle, her breath unsteady yet her posture firm, emerging from years of quiet suffering into unexpected strength. Something deep within her whispered that this day was not only about her dignity, it was about cleansing a place that had lost its way before the congregation could settle. Elder Matenj Sefu rose again, his tone no longer merely disappointed but resolute. "We cannot end this here," he said. "If Cato warned us 10 years ago, and if funds disappeared, then there must be more. We must examine everything starting today, starting now." A low rumble of agreement swept across the pews. Some members nodded vigorously. Others wiped their eyes, ashamed of how easily they had followed Lemuel's commands. Morobi shifted uncomfortably, stepping forward as though finally ready to speak. But Elder Before lifted a hand gently. "Before that," he said, "there is something else attached to the letter." He turned to a small folded note tucked behind the last page. The paper was newer, written in a different hand, clearly added recently. The elder frowned. "This is strange. It seems to be from the postal office, indicating that someone attempted to intercept this letter before it was delivered." Murmurs rippled across the sanctuary. Edessa's heartbeat quickened. "Intercept," she whispered. "But who would even know about it?" Elder Before scanned the room, his eyes thoughtful. "We will investigate that as well." At that moment, Morobi finally stepped forward, wiping sweat from his brow. He spoke with a trembling voice. "Church, I must confess something." Half the room turned toward him. Edessa stiffened, sensing a new wave of truth rising like a tide about to break. Morobi took a deep breath. For months, I have tried to talk to Pastor Lemuel about the building fund records. He always dismissed me. But last week I discovered that someone had been altering financial files, digitally and physically. Gasps erupted. I suspected something was deeply wrong, Morobi continued. But when I questioned him, he threatened to fire me. His voice broke. I should have spoken sooner. Tell us who did it? Someone shouted from the back. Morobi looked down at his hands. I cannot say for certain, but I found one file with handwriting that matched Lemuel's notes from previous budget meetings. And there were receipts withdrawals from the fund that clearly did not belong to church expenses. Elder Matenge exchanged a grim look with Before. How much was taken? He asked. Morobi hesitated. More than 200,000 setas. The sanctuary erupted into disbelief. Some cried. Others clutched their chests. Adisa felt her knees weaken, not from fear but from the magnitude of the deceit her husband had once sensed. As the room struggled to absorb the truth, Elder Before raised his hand for calm. Please, everyone. There's a process to follow. We must see all the documents. But before he could continue, a woman in a bright green wrapper, Nambi Ekond, the church treasurer, stood slowly from the left pew, her face twisted with guilt. Elders, she whispered, there is something I must confess to. Another wave of tension washed through the hall. Nambi clutched a folder nervously. I knew, she said, her voice cracking. I saw irregularities in the accounts months ago. I brought them to Pastor Lemuel. He told me that if I valued my job and my place in this church, I should keep silent. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I was afraid. And because I was afraid, I allowed this to continue. The room erupted again, this time with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Men stood, demanding explanations. Women wiped tears with the edges of their scarves. A young man near the front slammed his Bible closed, his voice shaking with outrage. Is this what our offerings became? A wallet for the pastor? Nambi sobbed harder. I never took anything. I only covered for him. And I am ready to face the consequences. But Elder Matenge didn't explode at her like many expected. Instead, he said quietly, fear controls good people when bad leadership grows unchecked. Today is the day we uproot that fear. His words steadied the room, then he looked directly at Adisa. Sister, if you have anything you wish to say, please speak. Adisa blinked, surprised. She had never imagined herself standing before the whole congregation, let alone after such a revelation. But something strong and steady rose within her. She stepped forward, feeling dozens of eyes watching with anticipation, empathy, and guilt. I only want one thing, she began softly. Truth. My husband believed in this church. He believed in its calling. And he believed that if things ever became dark, the people here would be brave enough to bring the light back. The congregation listened with absolute silence. Even the air felt still. I am not here to tear the church down, she continued. I am here because Cato asked you to protect me, not because I am important, but because he believed your hearts were good. Today you proved him right. You heard the truth and did not run from it. Tears filled many eyes. Adisa felt her own throat tighten. But if this church wants to heal, it must be willing to confront everything, not just what is easy. Before she could continue, the sanctuary doors swung open. Everyone turned. 2 officers entered, not police but community auditors, called by Elder Matenge hours earlier when the first inconsistencies were suspected. With them walked a tall woman in a formal navy coat, Inspector Halima Nwoko, known across the district for exposing financial crimes in various institutions. She carried a tablet and a thick binder under her arm. Apologies for the intrusion, she said calmly. But we received a request for immediate auditing of Glory River Church. We came as quickly as we could. A stunned silence followed. No one expected the investigation to begin this quickly. Inspector Nwoko approached the pulpit, her expression stern yet fair. I need access to all financial records, digital and handwritten, for the past 10 years. I also need statements from the treasurer and the assistant pastor. Nambi and Morobi exchanged nervous glances but nodded. But then the inspector turned her gaze toward Adisa. "And you are the widow of Cato Kumba?" Adisa swallowed. Yes, the inspector reached into her binder and pulled out a printed letter. 2 months ago, someone tried to block the release of an old postal file connected to your husband's name. The attempt was flagged, which is how the letter resurfaced. Gasps echoed across the sanctuary. We traced the request to a device registered to a member of this congregation. She paused. The member is present here today. People stiffened in their seats. Adisa felt a chill ripple through her. Inspector Nwoko flipped to the next page. The request came from the office computer of Pastor Lemuel Tand. The sanctuary erupted. Voices clashed, chairs scraped, and murmurs surged like thunder rolling across the mountains. Some people yelled that they always suspected something. Others cried, realizing how deeply they had been deceived. Elder Before clutched the letter tightly, shaking his head in disbelief. Adisa felt tears gather but refused to let them fall. Not until the full truth stood clear before everyone. Inspector Nwoko continued. We have already seized the church's administrative laptop. Early findings show document deletion attempts, falsified receipts, and manipulated bank records. She flipped another page. Funds earmarked for widows were redirected to a private account belonging to Pastor Lemuel. A woman in the second row cried out in shock. A man clenched his fist, trembling. The treasurer collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by guilt and relief now that transparency was finally emerging. Inspector Nwoko faced the congregation. A full investigation will take time, but I can say this much already: your former pastor has committed serious financial misconduct. Charges will follow as evidence solidifies. Elder Before nodded solemnly. We thank you, Inspector. This truth must come to light. But Nwoko was not finished. She reached into her coat pocket and held up a small brown envelope. This was found inside the administrative desk. It bears the handwriting of Cato Kumba. Adisa stepped forward instinctively. Another letter? Yes, the inspector replied. But this one is addressed to you? Every sound in the room vanished. The world shrank to the envelope in Nwoko's hand, and the trembling breath Adisa struggled to release. Her fingers shook as she took the letter, its weight both comforting and terrifying. She held it against her chest, unable to open it yet. The inspector softened her tone. Take your time. When you are ready, the church will hear it if you choose to share. Adisa nodded, overwhelmed. Her heart felt full and shattered at the same time. She looked up to see dozens of tearful faces watching her, not with judgment, not with pity, but with deep respect born from truth finally breaking open after years of silence. The congregation slowly gathered around her, forming a circle of unity that had been missing for so long. Hands rested gently on her shoulders. Whispers of comfort rose around her. Elder Before placed his hand over hers. This church owes you more than an apology, he said. It owes you restoration. Morobi spoke next. We failed you, Sister Adisa, but today we begin again. Adisa closed her eyes, breathing in the warmth of the moment. She could feel her husband's presence in the air, not as a memory, but as a force guiding her toward closure she never expected to find. The investigation team moved aside, organizing documents and statements. Elders prepared to address the congregation once more. Members embraced one another, trying to rebuild trust fractured by betrayal. Everything felt suspended between sorrow and healing, but the story was not over. Adisa opened her eyes and stared at the envelope in a mixture of fear and longing. She knew she must read it not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in the truth Cato had protected. She took a deep breath. Then she slowly tore open the letter, ready to hear her husband's final words. The sanctuary leaned in, and the next lines would change everything. Tender stillness settled over the sanctuary as Adisa unfolded the letter with slow, deliberate care. The paper, worn at the edges, trembled slightly between her fingers, carrying the familiar scent of home that she had missed for so long. When she finally opened it, the handwriting inside was unmistakably Cato's, steady, thoughtful, and full of the same gentleness he had carried through life. Members leaned forward, not out of curiosity alone but out of a newfound reverence for the man who had given them this final truth. Adisa inhaled deeply and with a steady voice began to read, "My beloved Adisa." The letter began, "If these words find you, it means my time with you has ended. I pray you have found strength in the memories we built and in the faith we shared. I wrote this letter not for sorrow but for protection. I sensed changes in the church leadership long before others noticed, and I feared that the place we helped build would drift from its purpose. If the day comes when this letter is opened, it means the truth must rise, and I trust that the people will choose what is right." Her voice wavered, but she continued, "Do not fear the darkness of others. You have walked through storms quietly, and you will walk through this one with dignity. If the church stands with integrity, stay. If not, walk away without looking back. You owe nothing to corruption. You owe everything to truth." By the time she reached the final line, "You are stronger than you know, my Adisa," tears flowed freely throughout the sanctuary. Some wept openly for her. Others cried because the words reminded them of how far the church had strayed. And many, perhaps for the first time in years, felt a deep shame for the pain they had witnessed but never questioned. When she lowered the letter, the hall remained completely still, as though the walls themselves were absorbing Cato's message. Elder before Masako stepped forward, his eyes damp with emotion. "Sister Adisa," he said softly, "your husband has spoken truth not only to you but to all of us. His words expose what we ignored for far too long: our own silence, our own comfort in the shadows, our own willingness to follow without accountability." He turned toward the congregation. "This is our wake-up call. We cannot allow one man's ambition to define the faith of hundreds. We must rebuild stronger, cleaner, wiser." The murmurs of agreement grew into determined nods. It was clear that Cato's voice had sparked something powerful inside the community. Inspector Halim Nwoko closed her binder with a respectful nod toward Adisa. "You have given us clarity," she said. "Your husband's courage has made our work easier. The investigation will continue and charges will be prepared. Financial restitution will be requested for the stolen funds, including those meant for your support as a widow." Her words sent a ripple of awe through the room. For the first time in years, Adisa felt the weight pressing on her soul lighten, not fully gone but no longer suffocating. She bowed her head in gratitude. Morobi stepped forward next, clearly shaken but determined. "Church," he said, "we must acknowledge that I too remained silent for too long. I doubted my instincts, feared losing my place, and allowed wrongdoing to continue unchecked. I ask for your forgiveness. And starting today, I pledge to lead with transparency, humility, and openness. If the elders feel it is right, I will serve as interim pastor until proper elections are held." His voice carried sincerity, and the congregation slowly nodded. The people needed a shepherd, but this time they wanted one who had learned from failure, not one who hid behind false holiness. The treasurer Nambi approached Adisa quietly and knelt at her feet. "I am deeply sorry," she whispered. "I allowed myself to be intimidated. But today you reminded us of what courage looks like." Adisa gently lifted her up, embracing her with forgiveness more powerful than any scolding could offer. "We heal together," she said softly. "Fear loses power when truth is spoken." The elders gathered around the pulpit and discussed immediate steps: suspending all major expenditures, appointing a financial review committee, and calling a general meeting the following week to restructure leadership. For the first time in years, decisions were being made openly, with no backroom deals, no hidden agendas, and no manipulation. The congregation watched with a mixture of relief and cautious hope, sensing that this turning point would shape the next decade of their spiritual home. When the meeting concluded, Elder Bafor invited Adisa to stand before the congregation one final time. She stepped forward with humility, clutching her husband's letter close to her chest. "I want to thank all of you," she said. "Not for standing with me, but for standing with truth. My husband believed in this church. He believed in each of you. And today I saw that same strength in your hearts." Her eyes swept slowly across the room. "I do not need pity. I need only the assurance that this place, this home we built, will become what it was meant to be. A young woman stood and spoke softly. Sister Adisa, we owe you more than words. Please allow us to support you. Others echoed the sentiment, offering meals, assistance, and support for her daily needs. She accepted their kindness with gratitude but insisted that the restoration of the church meant more to her than material offerings. If this place heals, she said, then I too will heal. As people prepared to leave, clusters formed around Adisa, offering hugs, blessings, and apologies. The atmosphere that once felt heavy with tension now carried warmth and unity. Children who barely understood the events clung to her legs, sensing her gentle spirit. Elders held her hands, promising to rebuild what was broken. What had begun as humiliation had transformed into honor, her dignity restored. Her husband's legacy protected, outside. The afternoon sun shone brightly over the courtyard, casting long rays through the church's tall windows. The light touched Adisa's face softly, as though Kato himself was reassuring her. She stood for a long moment beneath the acacia tree near the gate, the same kind that shaded her husband's grave. She whispered, "We did it, Kato." Your voice was heard. A breeze rustled through the branches, wrapping her in its gentle embrace. She walked home with her head lifted high. No longer the widow people pitied, but the woman who carried truth into a place that had forgotten it. And behind her, Glory River Church began its long journey back to honesty, compassion, and purpose, guided not by grand speeches, but by the courage of one quiet widow and the enduring wisdom of her late husband. If this story touched your heart, then you already know why we tell these narratives, to remind every soul listening that dignity has no price, and truth always finds its voice. Adisa's journey shows that even when the world tries to silence the vulnerable, justice rises from the places they least expect. And if you felt that rise, that shiver of courage, that moment of hope, then this is your family. This is your community. So before you go, take a moment to subscribe. Join us for the next chapter, the next battle, the next triumph of ordinary people who refuse to be broken. Every week we bring you stories that uplift, challenge, and inspire. Your support helps us keep these voices alive. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next story.